Excuse me. This week, I had taken our friend Charles to work, when I went to pick him up, he just happens to live in my old apartments, that I lived in, before I met and moved in with Roger. And so I decided that I would drive by my old place. And you see, I had this plant whenever I lived there, and it's my favorite kind of plant in the entire world. It is an elephant ear. Now, I know most people, they love something more exotic or some type of flowering plant, but me, I'm not really a flowers growing kind of guy. And I know that sounds really odd to you, but it's true. And I'm not sure why, I just like the greenery. I think it's beautiful. And so when I lived there, I had this elephant ear that I just adored. And it really was a time of great spiritual growth and emotional growth for me. And so my urge to garden was simply an expression of what was going on inside of me at the time. And now I bought this plant at a garage sale in Los Fresnos for $2. And it was in sad shape, much like I had been at one time. And it had one leaf on it. It had ants all in it. It got all over my car. It bit my hands. It was a mess. It was a mess. But I didn't give up. I spent $2 on it. I didn't give up. I bought it. I loved it. And I grew it. And so eventually it got too big for the pots. And so I planted it in the ground outside. And it did very well. But when I moved in with Roger, I had to say goodbye. So I gave it a kiss on the ear. And I went my way. As I drove by this week, I took a picture of it, and that's the one that you can see here. She's doing good, and it made my heart feel good, and seeing it again, it really ignited, that urge inside of me to garden, because right now, in my life, I'm again going through this extraordinary spiritual growth. And so the very same day, I went to Lowe's, and I bought another elephant ear to nurture. It cost like $60 for the pot and soil. I had that urge. And so, but I still, even after I got it planted, watered, and got looking at it, but I still just couldn't stop thinking about my little green friend over at the apartments. So, the next day, when I went to pick up Charles for work, first I drove her over to my old apartment, and I parked a few spaces down, and I made sure her blinds were closed. And then I proceeded to scurry over and dig up a piece of the plant, roots and all. And then I sped off to pick up Charles for work. Unbeknownst to him, he was an accessory to first-degree plant napping. So the moral of the story is be careful who you ride with. But the reason the contraband, right? But the reason I tell you this story is because today's gospel reminded me of my little elephant friend. See, I had that plant for 5 years, and just, when I thought that I knew every part of her, just when I thought, that I've done so much to grow her, like when she was reaching her peak, God smiled down and he surprised me. I opened my door one morning, and this is what I thought. I was floored. I'm like, what the heck? Who knew she could bloom? Like, who knew elephant ears even bloomed? Wow. And I remember thinking, I couldn't believe it. I thought, well, something must have grown in there. It's sick. I wasn't sure. But who knew? And God knew. And it turns out that the elephant ear is in the same family as the peace lily. And it blooms. And so my favorite plant is a flower, after all. So God exceeded my expectations, and he challenged my preconceived, notions, and he caused me to dream bigger and to remain open to what other surprises that God will have in my life. And God is always finding new ways, to reach us. And his surprises are like gifts when it's not your birthday, like flowers when it's not your anniversary, breakfast in bed when you're not sick. And he surprises us in all kinds of ways. It's that, sunny day outshining the rain forecast whenever they had a big outdoor event planned. It's the puppy on your doorstep that you just didn't know that you needed. It's that long-lost friend or love magically appearing at H-E-B. It's finding that ring or pen that you thought was long lost. It's the comforting hand of a stranger when your tears can no longer be held inside. It's a love letter resurfacing after decades that touch your heart. It's that dream of a loved one speaking from heaven just when your soul needs it most. You You see, God is full of surprises, but they don't happen as often as we would like them to. And the truth is that sometimes we feel like we've reached a standstill of sorts, like you've become stagnant in some way. Now, maybe you just don't feel like anything surprising has happened in a while. You're just doing your thing, day in, day out, waiting for that sign of progress to sprout up. Work, school, love, friends, family, and yes, even our faith go through seemingly dry spells. Times when you feel like you're just floating around when you really want to be sailing. And it's in those moments, that we ask, God, why isn't anything happening? I'm here, I'm doing the work. Is my faith really growing, Father? Do you have any surprises left for me? Sometimes it's our faith that seems the most flat. And don't get me wrong, it's there and it's strong, but it doesn't feel like it's getting any stronger or building up in any way. In fact, it may seem that it feels the same way it did a year ago. And so our instinct tells us that we must be doing something wrong. Or maybe there's something that we're not doing. Something. So some people change churches, they quit altogether. Others will throw themselves all the way in, studying more, worshiping more, praying more. And the same goes for our personal lives. We try so hard to make things happen sometimes. I know you know this one. Like trying to force love to occur when and where you want to. You work so hard expecting that whatever it is that you planned, that the result will be directly from your efforts. And it's easy to feel like we are in control, that we are the reason for our growth. But how in the world can you be surprised whenever you think that it is you in charge? I mean, if you're doing the planning and the achieving, then how can you ever be surprised? You know what's coming. And if you get the credit and the glory, then what does that leave for God? German theologian Helmut Thilke says that we cannot comprehend the parables of Jesus until we can see ourselves in the story, like a small child recognizing ourselves in the mirror for the very first time. Then we finally get it. And it's also said that Jesus told so many parables that he himself became one. And, when you think about that, sometimes it's elusive, yet pointed. Indirect, yet powerfully relevant. And it's just like the very kingdom that he brings. It's here, but it's not here. In order to describe it, he often uses these parables, which seem to be thrown along our lives. And they don't really give us the answers, per se, but they make us think. They make us ponder the possibilities of what it could mean for us. And it deepens the depth to which they can reach in our lives. And they're like onions, layer after layer, there's more. And the deeper you get, sometimes tears flow forth. In using these thought-provoking stories, Jesus recognizes the importance of the imagination because, he's seeking for us to have a shift in our creativity, in our thoughts. A shift in the way that we see ourselves, the way that we see God, and the way that we see others. But such a shift, it may seem very small, and it may seem insignificant. But today he compares it to a mustard seed. A mustard seed? That's it? That's what the kingdom of God is like? A mustard seed? I don't get it. How can it be that simple? And those, who really take every word of the Bible literally have a bit of a problem with this parable because modern day has shown us that the mustard seed is not the smallest of seeds. In fact, the orchid seed is as small as a speck of dust. And so, was Jesus wrong? Was he lying, people ask? But the truth is, it actually lies in the very parables and their reason for being. Because Jesus speaks to us in a language that we know and that we understand. And during that time period, the mustard seed is what they understood. This is what they knew. This is what they needed to hear so that they could understand the story that he was giving. So Jesus tells us two parables today. The first, about the growing seed, is only found in this book, in the book of Mark. And we read this, we must always remember that Mark is writing, to the first generation of followers. And they had a very, very growing impatience. When is Jesus coming back? And so that was always an undercurrent of the audience. And it's, it really is an impatience that we can relate to in our own life, because we want things right now. We don't want to wait. I want it right now. We want spiritual or personal growth now, or at once, as Mark likes to say. So Jesus says, this is what the kingdom of God is like. A man scatters seed on the ground, night and day, whether he sleeps or he gets up, the seed sprouts and grows, though he does not know how. All by itself the soil produces grain. First the stalk, then the head, then the full kernel in the head. And as soon as the grain is ripe, he puts the sickle to it, because the harvest has come. So today, farmers, they use all kinds of high-tech planters. Eddie can probably tell us about that. That they count the seeds, and it evenly spaces them. And as it lays them in the ground, so many seeds, per inch. So many seeds per acre. And so many rows, so many inches apart. Each seed so far down in the soil. But essentially, when you think about all that, he is doing the same thing that the farmer did in biblical times. He's just scattering seed. That's it. It's just a lot more organized than it used to be. But does the farmer understand all the biological functions, that are happening of the seed? No. He just plants it under the soil in the right conditions, and the seed grows all by itself. He cannot make it grow any faster or slower. He can only select, the seed, plant it, and care for it. And neither can he manufacture a seed. Both have to come from God. In fact, the farmer in the story knows this so well, he just goes to sleep. Because he knows that it's God that's doing the work. And Jesus is very right about this. Our faith is very much like that. We can't make it grow by our own efforts. And that kind of makes you think for a minute. Our instinct is to say, well, that's not true. But that's why he's telling us these parables. Sure, just like the farmer, we play a role. But it is such a minuscule one. As important as we make ourselves out to be, it's still just minuscule. God can grow plants without us. We cannot grow them without God. It's like having a baby. You plant the seed, and then at the time of birth, you collect the harvest. But the true beauty and the miracle and the mind-blowing creation happening inside of you is something that you have no control over. And it is a beautiful process, a mysterious process. And it's God who performs the miracle. It's just you who receives it. So you see, we just have to plant the seed in our hearts and our minds, and then we have to do exactly what the farmer does. We just have to wait. We can't, force God's grace within us. It's not ours to multiply. We cannot give a gift of that magnitude to ourselves. And so wait we must. And we don't like it one bit. No one likes to wait. We're impatient people, which is why when we become stagnant in our life or in our faith, it drives us crazy. It makes us feel uneasy, and anxiety comes over you, and you begin fussing over the little lifeless seeds that are in your life. Start dousing them with pesticide, repotting them, putting them in the sun, sprinkling too much Miracle-Gro on it. And it's like all this fluster of activity for something that you cannot even control in the first place. Of course, we're going to be let down. I think that's the reason that I don't like flowers. Because I don't want to wait, and I don't want to be let down. When I was about 12, I remember, planting seeds. I'd plant them, and I was very excited. I planted it, and, I kept it inside. I didn't want nothing to get to it. And I bought one of those bulbs, that's for plants, and I kept it under there. It had a name. But after a week, man, I stared at that thing all day long, and moved the light. And so after a week, I just dug it up to see what was happening. And then I planted it, and I did that. It never grew, but I would do that every week. But you see, we're like that as adults too. But, we must fix our eyes. Again, this theme is running through our services. We must fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. There is a silent and a powerful coming to be happening in places that you just cannot see. In the darkness of the soil, in the deepness of your soul. And it's an undercurrent of divine vitality that works without you lifting a finger. And sometimes, like the farmer, we take for granted, what is happening underneath. But it's this quiet, this sleeping unfolding that truly gives us life. And so every day we must remember to call importance and awareness to its going-ons. We must say, God, I'm feeling a little low today. It seems the things that I want are just so far out of my reach. But even still, I know that you're there, and I know that you're working for me. Even when I don't feel you, I know you're working for me. So I'm going to trust you, God. I'm going to trust you that you're going to keep your promise to me. I'm going to trust you enough that I'm going to lay down my shovel. I'm going to put down the hose. And I'm going to let you be the gardener that I was never meant to be, Father. So how do you know it's growing? You don't. You just have to trust God above all else and give thanks when the harvest comes. And remember, he says it comes in stages. First the stalk, then the head, and then the kernel. And we must remember that in our life, you don't get it all at once. We don't. But there will be little harvests along the way that let you know it's growing somewhere in you. The first time, that I'd realized that my faith had increased was when my dog Pepper died. And it was the first dog, that I'd lost. And my most favorite dog that I've ever had, which is saying a lot because Roger and I have a batch. But I worried for the day that this would come and how it would affect my well-being and for how long. But her death wasn't the life-stopping heartache that I thought it was going to be. Of course I was sad, but I found out that God had been strengthening me all this time without me even knowing it. That is, until I needed to know it. You see, it's the flowering of my faith that consoles me in between blooms. Your harvest will come, and you too will experience a flowering of your faith. And when it does, your little mustard seed that you fretted over will flourish into the largest of trees with such enormous branches that birds can perch in its shade. The gospel so tells us. And when you have a faith that big, it makes you wonder about the birds that are in your life. What kind of safe place is your faith providing for others? How do your seeds, the seeds that your faith reaps, help others to grow into their own? And you can tell it because whenever they fly away and turn into a shady perch for other people, that's when you know. Even when people, weren't meant to be in our branches forever, because we remember that there's a time for everything under the sun. Remember, fix your eyes on what is not seen. Because if you think about it, if you always saw it growing, there would be no surprise to be had. Perhaps the greatest surprise that God can give us is His enormous love. After everything that we've done in our lives, and He's still appearing in the most peculiar places. And perhaps the most surprising thing that you can give, that we can give to God, is our absolute trust. Because in some way, we all hold back. So today, as we ponder with one another Jesus' parables, the story comes into focus and we realize, that this church is evidence of the mustard seed at work, to which we see that small beginnings yield great outcomes. Wherever you are in your journey, no matter how stationary you may feel, remember that God is growing something just for you. Even when you don't feel Him working, you trust that He is. And surely you'll see that He will sprout forth a surprise that will dazzle you. You may be in between blooms right now, but the flowering of your faith is soon coming in season.